So I was doing my research, as one does, and I heard an interview, and you used the phrase, everything changes and nothing changes all at once, to describe your music. And I think in this case, in the case of this interview, you were talking about your piece, Monochromatic Light, Afterlife, which was inspired by the Rothko Chapel, but that's also the title of your first string quartet. And when I heard you say those words, just because of where I am in my heart right now, it just seemed to me like a description of the world, everything changing and nothing changing all at once, and the pull and the push and the ugly and the beautiful, and the stillness, I guess, that you try to find in the middle.
Mm. Well, that stillness, I think, is a reminder of us to find ways to center ourselves. Whenever we're experiencing music, whenever we experience sound, we're no longer the same. There's something about us that changes the instant we hear something. Somehow our senses begin to start to experience things, and it's an interesting point of departure from where you were, just a second ago. Like when you were out in the real world, experiencing, all kinds of things going on, all the time. And suddenly when you're in a situation, where you're put in a place, you're put in that middle ground to where you have to really focus and really center yourself. I think silence is a great thing about that. It really kind of encourages you to center yourself.
Yeah, well, that stillness. So I think in music, we're always aware of the spaces between the notes.
Right.
But those spaces are always a journey.
Mm-hmm.
And your spaces are long. And do you think that there is ever a center of that space that is a journey that is filled with tension, right? Because it is traveling.
Right.
Can you find the place that is actually a release in the middle?
It's possible. It depends on who the listener is, and what their life experiences are. And in its own way, the piece also has its way of releasing, a lot of, because we're in a space together, for a very long time. We're in an experience, we're not witnessing a concert, as it were. It's always a journey, and it's always a time for me and the audience, and everybody, in the space to really center themselves. And that's why I think, sound and silence are such powerful things, for us as a society, and also for us, as individuals in our everyday lives.
It's almost an impossible thing to find in the world.
Yes.
I know you had a chaotic childhood, and I did too, and I remember so well diving down to the bottom of the pool and sitting on the bottom of the pool so that I could be in that underwater silence, which is a sound too, but it was removed, it was otherworldly, it was safe, and, those vibrations are different. It's, where can you find silence? It's so hard.
Yeah, well, of course, there's no such thing as, absolute silence, right? There's no such thing, but I would say that, let's see, like what you mentioned, tension, right? Or the let's say the absence of, in this case, quote unquote, musical sounds, right? Even though to me, what is musical can vary from person to person, but I would just say the absence of, in this case, organized sound, with Monochromatic Light, Afterlife, the absence of any notated musical material or anything of that sort. These pockets of time for you to reflect on what you just heard, I think, are just as important as the sounds that are produced by the instrumentalists, who are playing them. And yet the music is not separate from who you are as an individual. It's not separate from, what you experience in daily life. It's not separate from really anything. It's all a part of us. And I think to be able to get into a space where we can, remind ourselves of this, that's the most important thing. Yeah.
You said something about the experience or the circumstances of the listener, and
right.
I visited the Rothko Chapel a few years ago, and I don't remember what kind of day I was having, but it was the wrong kind of day. And I remember going into that space and feeling like either I stay here for 5 minutes or I stay here all day. There was a discomfort with the stillness that place was demanding of me that day.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering about duration also for you, and how you expect or hope listeners to engage and intersect with the duration of your pieces.
Well, I'll use my experience of the chapel as an example. In constructing Monochromatic Light, I spent several days at the chapel. I went there every day for, I guess, maybe about 3-4 days or something. I was there in Houston for a long time. And each day I went, the amount of hours I spent increased, for each day that I went there. And it's, again, another episode of everything changing and nothing changing, right? Where you have these black, beautiful canvases, of Mark Rothko in this chapel. And, of course, they're not moving. They're not going anywhere. But you do have the skylight, that is above everything. And as the day changes and as the day goes on, somehow the shades and the colors, the change in the color of those paintings becomes much more evident the more you see, each canvas, when you walk from canvas to canvas. And the beautiful thing about it is, you're also changing. You're changing with the paintings. There's a reason why that chapel really exists, and why those paintings are within that space, and it's for you to really be in tune with, the absence of musical sound, and being in tune with, just yourself, and being in tune with those paintings, and, and how the time is passing, like in how we experience change as time passes.
We're at the Big Ears Festival here in Knoxville, and there is a culture here which I think is wonderful. This is an intensely listening audience. This is an audience that really cares about music, and there is also a culture of coming and going and stopping into this and that. And when I was at your concert the other night, there was a lot. I mean, there was flow. There were people coming in and people going out, and there were people saying, but there was. And I was wondering how you feel about that in a piece like this. That is.
It doesn't bother me. I mean, it depends on the listener. I mean, we understand that it's a festival, and people are going to go in and come out, as necessary. I mean, because there's so much music that's going on, and there is a great deal of activity, a lot of different bands performing, chance to experience the city. And so, for me, it wasn't a requirement that everybody would stay.
Yeah.
What I do hope is that, every listener who came to experience the piece has taken something else with them besides just being a mere spectator.
Do you have an ideal environment that you've experienced or that you envision in which your work is heard?
I mean, in a lot of ways, I don't care. As long as it's in a space where people can focus on the music itself, and, as long as it's a situation where the listener can center themselves and, be in touch with what's going on in the music. For me, that's all that matters, at that point. And, if it's programmed with other music, that's also fine. However the listener chooses to receive it, as long as, they can accept the work on its own terms, as it is, then, that's perfectly fine for me. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think your work kind of creates its own envelope, Yeah.
Yeah.
I was really intrigued with your use of sort of fragments. I know that you think a lot about the ancestors and how they permeate our consciousness and our creativity. And in this piece, there are these fragments of sometimes I feel like a motherless child.
Yes.
And I would love to hear you just talk a little bit about how the ancestors and the echoes, filter in.
I mean, a lot of it has to do with my experiences in the church, in many ways too. And, I grew up in the Black church, and, and I've went to many different services and read a lot about slave songs and different things, of that source. And I just felt like it was something that I wanted to come in contact with, in my own terms, in my own music. And so I look at it as I almost see Monochromatic Light as a sacred event, where you would have, something, like this spiritual, really existing. But in the context of now, in the context of what's going on today, where there's so much chaos, that's out there, and the way that this spiritual and the music surrounding it responds to that chaos, these different things that are all interconnected.
I promised you we weren't going to talk about the astrophysics of jazz, but this is a little bit metaphysical. Stay with me.
Uh-oh.
So I've been here. I think sometimes you get to stay places longer than I do. I'm usually in and out, and it's very fly over my travels. And I've been here in Knoxville for a whole week, which to me is a long time, and it's good. And I have been having this feeling that music itself, or what we make in music or around music, is in itself a kind of stillness. It's a kind of place where people can come inside. And I'll tell you, so the first day I was here, I've been doing this work in the community, and we went to the Metro Drug Coalition here. It's a recovery program. And we had this long conversation about, well, some very basic concepts of humanity, like life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness, just for example. And there was a lot of talk about the courage of claiming any of those things. And the conversation did, in the end, veer towards faith. And so there I was, and I wanted to close out this session, and I found myself playing this arrangement by Sean Okpebolo of Amazing Grace. And there was such stillness in this music. I mean, the notes were moving, but there was such stillness in this room. And I was thinking about that, the chaos that is assaulting us all the time, and how if we can, just by virtue of any of the music we're making now, create that kind of stillness. I was thinking about the T.S. Eliot quote, the still point of the turning world. Maybe music right now is just the still point of the turning world.
Yeah, I agree. Very much with that. And in fact, there's a composition that I contributed to the recording that Lara Downes did, which focuses on that T.S. Eliot, poem where, and for me, the still point was, like I wanted to express that in the composition that I had wrote for that album, for the Room Full of Teeth choir and Lara Downes, performing together. And, the piece that I created for them is kind of, in many ways, a sonic response to what you're talking about, to what you just referred to with Amazing Grace and, and that stillness that was in that room at that time that you were playing it.
Yeah. Well, I guess that is the closest I come to that, to sitting on the bottom of the pool, is when I'm inside the music.
Yep.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Beautiful.